Just about to go on the air, as they say. Make sure we can. Okay. So as soon as our latest entry gets here, maybe we'll get things started. Just to sort of out of respect for the fact that you're willing to do this tonight, we should move along as expeditiously as possible. Okay. I guess I'll just start. I'm Peter Fairweather from Fairweather Consulting. Probably, I know some of you already from the Comprehensive Plan Committee. Joining me also to help facilitate this is Bill Springnether from Alta Planning and Design. Bill, why don't you just say hi and just talk a little bit about Alta and the stuff that you guys do.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Bill Springnether. I'm a landscape architect with Alta Planning, and we specialize in bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure projects all over the country. Most recently, we've been working, you may have heard of the Empire State Trail, which was a project that we initiated and continued working with the state on as the technical advisor. And I'll be working on this project specifically with issues relating to bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and design, as well as parking issues and green space, open space, trying to delve into what the needs are and how to make sure the needs are met. On this Zoom also, I have one of my colleagues, Carrie McKnight, who is silently sitting in the background taking notes. So just want to let you know we have additional support as well from some of our planning staff. So thank you all very much, and appreciate your time. Look forward to working with you on this project.
All right, thanks, Bill. And I suppose I should formally introduce myself. Peter Fairweather, Fairweather Consulting. We do planning, economic development, and strategic planning, and have been around for the last 20 years or so. And what we're doing tonight is really bringing together the policy boards for the village to talk about the key priorities that you folks see as we start this comprehensive planning process. You probably all, I'm hoping you at least took a look at the little packet that I sent along, which kind of outlines what is a strategic plan, and what is a comprehensive plan, and what it might mean for the village. So what we're going to do is, you received a survey as an email earlier. We're going to start the meeting by just going through the results we have as a way of starting the conversation about your perceptions about what is in the village, what you see as the long-term opportunities and issues that a comprehensive plan needs to address. So there'll be a fair amount of discussion, I'm hoping. The other thing is, this is set up so if you send a chat either to me or to the whole group, it will also be recorded. So if there's something that you would like to, sort of add to the conversation, but because there are so many on the Zoom, you haven't had a chance to speak, just put it in the chat, and that way we'll make sure it's included and noted. Okay, so the other thing is, as we start the discussion, if you could, before you speak for your first time, just identify yourself and your affiliation, which board you serve on, because I'm assuming you folks pretty much know each other, at least by name. Is that a reasonable assumption? Or should we go, we could go around and introduce one another. Do we want to do that?
That might be.
Okay. And what I'll do is, everybody I think has a different matrix of people. So I will just call the names that I have in front of me, and that's the order in which we'll do it. So we'll start with Michael.
Good evening, everybody. Mayor Newhart of the Village, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time out this evening, but also thank you for your service throughout the entire year and for many years. We truly appreciate it, and I think this is an exciting time for us.
Great. George McManus.
I think I'm on. Hello, everyone. George McManus from the Village Board. I've been on the board for, I guess, about 18 years, and we'll go from there.
Great. Thank you, George. Barry Cheney.
Barry Cheney, Village Board member, also chair of the Comprehensive Plan Committee. I was on the planning board for 23 years prior to coming on to the Village Board, and was also serving on the previous Master Plan Committee.
Bill Lindbergh.
You're muted, Bill.
Yeah, Bill Lindbergh, village trustee for 11 years. I live across the street from Krista Hahn.
Oh, boy.
And why is that significant? Oh, because you're on here also. Never mind.
There you go.
Bill Olson. You're muted, Bill.
I'm on the village planning board. Have been on it for, I guess, 8 or 9 years now. I was also the chairperson of the 2004 comprehensive plan that we have in front of us. I just want to point out that that plan is what now 17 years old, so it definitely is time for an updating.
Thank you, Bill. The next one says Jane Glasman. I have a feeling that's an alias.
It's Jane Glasman and
Michael Bertolini.
the two of us are on it together.
Okay, great.
And I've been the chairperson for the Architectural Review Board. Michael, I believe it's 40 years. It's either 38 years or 40 years. So it goes back just a few years. Yes.
Just a few years. You're historic.
Yes.
Okay. I guess let's go to Jesse Gallo.
Hi, Jesse Gallo, and a member of the Planning Board.
Thank you. Scott Brown.
Hi, all. Scott Brown. I'm on the ZBA.
Great. Matthew Finn.
I'm on the Architecture Review Board.
Thank you. Carrie Boland.
I am Carrie Boland. I'm on the planning board.
Great. Tom McKnight.
I am also on the planning board. Hi, everybody.
Christopher DeHaan.
On the Architectural Review Board, and have been a member on the board for about 10 years.
Jonathan Burley.
Good evening, everyone. Jonathan Burley, 12 years on the ZBA.
Brian with a Y.
Brian Barber, I'm the planning board member alternate.
Thank you, Brian. And Kara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kara McKnight. I'm with Alta Planning, and I will be silently taking notes.
All right. Good. So before we get started, any other questions, comments, reactions? Because first thing we're going to do is I will show you the results of the online survey that we've done as a way to start the conversation. But before we do that, anybody have anything else they would like to add? Okay. And you should feel free to chime in whenever. And as I said before, if the conversation is too busy and you still want to add something, please use the chat to do that. So let's start looking at the survey results, which are on the screen. Now, everybody should see that, I hope. So first, just to give you the response, there are 14 responses, 5 village board members, 4 planning board members, 3 ZBA members, and 2 from the Architectural Review Board. And what I'll do is each of the responses, I show you the total responses for all 14, and then how it breaks down by each board. for your information. And it's always, the hardest thing for me is to get the first slide to advance. This has always been the case for me, using Zoom for a whole year. There we go. So the question, has the village comprehensive plan been a useful guide for your decision-making in your current position with the village? 9 folks out of 14 said yes, 5 said no. And you can see the split is kind of interesting. Again, we're talking about only a few people. Most of the village board and planning board, ZBA and architectural review, not quite the same strength, even though, again, the responses are, I think there's 3 in the ZBA and 2 in the architectural review board. Any comments about what you see here or what the question provokes? Hearing none, we're going to continue. And again, if something should come to you 2 slides later, that's okay. Feel free to chime in and we could always back it up or just talk there. So the next question is, what would make the plan more valuable to you? And really, you can see on the left-hand side, the sort of closest to a consensus that she was not sure. But there were 3 that said more clearly stated policy recommendations, 3 for a more accessible format for the plan, graphically oriented and so on, 1 more relevant recommendations, and 2 others. And they were strengthening of language in the recommendations in the plan with a timeline and clear-cut plans for improvements, for example, sidewalks. And also explicit review of the comprehensive plan periodically for relevant content. The ZBA has not made any explicit connection between the existing plan and its deliberations. And you can see it's pretty, for the village board, it was pretty much more clearly stated recommendations that were not sure. The planning board, each of the respondents took one of the answers. Zoning board, similar. So that generally it looks like there's more or less satisfaction with the comprehensive plan. What could make it better? That seems to be pretty divided. For the most part, folks are not sure. And I'm taking that as you're interested in suggestions or approaches that could improve it, but that generally the plan was more or less acceptable in terms of its usefulness. Okay, onward. So now we've taken the recommendations from the 2004 comprehensive plan, and we asked the respondents to indicate whether that topic should be a high priority for the updated plan, somewhat important for the plan, or not important or already adequately addressed. So it doesn't need to be addressed during the update. So now we're going to look at those recommendations from the 2004 plan. First of all, the idea of creating design standards. And I've ranked these in order of from the highest level of support to the lowest level of support. So one of the ones that had the highest levels of support was the idea of addressing design standards. And you can see 85% of the respondents supported that. There were a couple of village board members that saw it as somewhat important, but not high priority. Everybody else saw it as high priority in terms of design standards. Any reactions, responses to that? Okay, onward. Village land use and planning codes. The idea to address those, to bring them in, consistent with the plan in 2004, still seen as a high priority or somewhat important by just about everybody. All 14 respondents. I don't think that should be a surprise. A pedestrian circulation plan. For example, Bill was just talking about the work that Alta does. Again, a high priority for everybody that responded. It's either a high priority or somewhat important. The majority of them see it as a high priority, the pedestrian circulation plan. Importance of the village gateway corridors. Again, you can see just about 80% high priority, somewhat important, about 20%. And again, that it's an important concern. And what you see here is a lot of these now, what we've talked about have to do with the regulation of the appearance and the built environment in the village. Now we're going to talk about some other things, and you can see there's still support for these things, but may not be quite as high a level as the other ones we just talked about. Capacities of village infrastructure. The village board, it's either high priority or there's some that say it's not important, already addressed. Everybody else, it's either a high priority or somewhat important. Any reactions to that? Infrastructure and the role it will be playing.
What are you considering infrastructure, Peter?
Well, I understand recently that definition has been extended at the federal level anyway. But, this is, in terms of the 2004 plan, it was pretty classic: streets, roads, wastewater, and water.
I would say that from Alta's perspective, we have, as a company, we've always considered infrastructure to include basically public engineered facilities that include sidewalks, bicycle rights of ways, trails, multi-use trails, that sort of thing. And then recently, with the advent of G4 and G5 broadband internet.
So what do folks think about the whole idea of infrastructure as being important, especially given the importance that pedestrian circulation has already been emphasized in the previous question? Any thoughts?
Well, response to the internet access, that right now is carried by the village is not responsible for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a village issue. It's an issue that's by whoever, Verizon or whoever else is providing your service. It's not a village issue.
Yep. Noted that it's something that's provided privately, but there are places where the internet infrastructure, broadband, is an issue because it's so hard to come by.
Yeah, but I wouldn't think in the village of Warwick. I don't think.
I'm sorry, Bill, I didn't catch that.
I don't think it's an issue in the village of Warwick. I don't think.
Okay. The broadband is pretty plentiful in the village.
I think so.
Okay, anybody disagree with that? Any other issues about infrastructure? Because there's been some talk about it. Things that need to be addressed.
Peter, I believe our park system would be considered part of the green infrastructure, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
And then the other thing would be our parking overall as a piece of the infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A piece of the transportation infrastructure. So parks and parking as the two elements of that. Any other thoughts either about those topics or about the topic of infrastructure in general?
Michael, I just want to clarify, just for the record, that green infrastructure, according to DOT and New York State DEC, have very specific definitions that relate to building facilities or preserving landscape to reduce stormwater runoff. In the planning world, green infrastructure expands to include parks and green spaces and open spaces. Mm-hmm. So we will consider that here, but I just want to clarify that just so that no.
Would sidewalks be considered infrastructure?
Yes.
I know the village is trying to address it. It's a major cost, but there's a really need to upgrade a lot of our sidewalks.
Okay.
Can I just go back and offer maybe a contrasting view on the internet?
Yep.
Broadband internet. There's no question that it's accessible, but commercial for-profit internet providers typically charge where they can make a comfortable profit, and that becomes a regressive issue in terms of equity of availability.
Good point.
So are there concerns about affordability of broadband in the village? In other words, it's available but expensive?
I have not heard complaints myself, but in terms of my family budget, I know I've switched to get the best deal I can get, and it bothers me every time the price goes up, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Mhm.
Okay. No.
So, and I can afford it.
Mhm.
So, you know, take
I
that.
think it's available, but not to every, I mean, it's available to everyone, but there are some aspects of the community that really struggle to purchase it.
Mm.
And it's become a real reality for a lot of school-age children this year who absolutely needed reliable internet to get their educations.
Yep, that's my point. And we read once in a while about a community often promoted as a forward-thinking community that provides broadband at a reduced price or subsidized or free broadband Wi-Fi centrally or those kinds of issues. So there's certainly a possibility there. I don't know what the advantage might be, but just to throw it out.
Yep, it's something sort of to keep in mind as we move forward. Good.
So Peter, one thought. I mean, this question seems to have a lot of support for high priority, but I just think given the discussion, it's overly broad, right? So maybe we split this up a bit.
Okay.
I mean,
yeah.
if the exercise is to determine the priority of these things, right? I don't know if this one question will capture everything.
Yeah. And
go ahead, Peter.
Good point, Tom. But I think what the purpose of this exercise is just to sort of review what were the recommendations in the previous plan and get folks' perceptions. I mean, this discussion we're just having now about infrastructure wouldn't have been the same discussion in 2004. The whole issue of broadband and the role that it plays.
It wasn't discussed at all.
Right. So that's, and in that regard, people don't hesitate to bring up a topic that's related to any of these subjects that we're talking about, because really what we'd like to do is kind of get the issues on the table to see what people are thinking about in terms of thinking about the future for the village of Warwick. And, for example, one takeaway, it's not a big thing, but it's something to keep in mind, is just that whole question of affordability of broadband, especially given the changing nature of the use of broadband. Kids learning at home, that hopefully the necessity for that due to the pandemic will go away by the next school year, but schools may decide to continue to do some form of that. So, we just need to keep that in mind as we're looking to the future and what things should be included in the plan. It may not be a high priority, may not be the first thing, but it could turn out to be something worth noting and tracking in the years ahead. The village green belt. Maintaining the village green belt was something in 2004 was seen as, and it was listed as one of the major recommendations. And you can see everybody thinks it's either high priority or somewhat important.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my question. Where is the village green belt?
What do you mean by that question? Where is it? It's around the house. Some of it is in the town, some of it is the village. Most of it is the town.
And if folks pretty much on board with that, because that suggests there's managing the issue of the green belt is going to require some town village cooperation.
Mm-hmm. So far, I think the town has been very cooperative on this.
And is it
on the comprehensive plan? You'll see that they also recommend maintaining green spaces around the 3 villages in the town.
Yep. Is that something that's under threat with development, the green belt?
Yes.
A good.
So do you feel that it needs to be better defined?
It needs to be better defined, Barry?
I think
no, that was my question that was being asked. So I'm sorry, I overspoke over Barry. Barry, can you please state your...
to a great degree, there's been preservation around the village in a lot of the areas. So, if you head east, you've got the county park. If you go south, you've got Pioneer Farm, which is PDR. And to the west, it's a little different, but certainly to the north, I believe part of that's preserved. So, and there is continuing opportunity to preserve more. So, while we don't have control over it completely, there's, as Bill said, there's a lot of working together that's been responsible for what we've achieved so far, and hopefully what we'll continue to develop in the future.
And let me just throw this out to the group. What's the role of the Greenbelt? Is it recreation, preserving scenic vistas, agriculture? I suspect all of the above. But when you folks are thinking about the Village Greenbelt, what are the sort of uses, roles that you see it playing for the village?
This is my individual opinion, but I think of it as kind of, sometimes when you enter a store and you're not walking right into racks and racks of stuff, there's kind of a pause, there's a space, and you readjust, and it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a store, it could be anything, where you have a moment of collecting yourself, reflection, and then you enter the space, in this case, the village. I think sometimes when you drive on some roads that kind of space, village, there isn't a sense that you've arrived anywhere other than perhaps a sign that says you are now entering town of Blois. So I think of the as a belt that you've arrived somewhere, you've arrived in the village of Warwick.
So it's like the entrance transition. It provides
There.
that.
Sure.
I think Carrie has described this very well. Warwick Village is surrounded by open space. It's surrounded by places where there's palms around the community, and this is part of the ambiance of the village of Warwick. I mean, it's not like Chester, for example, or it's not like Monroe, which haven't done this way. One of the things that makes Warwick kind of special is we are a village which still integrates with the agricultural land around it.
Okay, good, great. Any other thoughts about this? This is really helpful, and these are the kinds of details and insights that I think will help us focus on issues as we come across.
Yeah, Peter, I think it comes down to character, right? Even those who don't live in the village, they enjoy coming there because it is that experience, right? Where they do feel they are in the country, then they can come get experience in the village. That's and one thing I will say is, if there's an opportunity to continue to work with the town on prioritizing which lots could come under that preservation plan, I think a prime target would be those that aren't already in the program, right? To be considered the green belt, right, surrounding the village. So my thought is, if the town is amenable, because again, the town wants the village to have a thriving environment, right? So for those particular properties in that green belt, as we've described it, my opinion is those should be high on the list, if not the top, in terms of which ones should be preserved.
Okay, great, good, thank you.
Hey, Peter, I just want to say one thing. As the mayor of this remarkable village, when somebody asks me where the village ends and the town starts, I'm always glad to say it starts at the open space. It starts at the farmland, instead of saying it starts at the Dairy Queen or the McDonald's or whatever. So there is really something to be said for this.
Yes.
I think it's a very kind of classic, or for lack of a better word, urban design strategy to draw that contrast between the village and the space around it, as opposed to having sprawl at the edges, which kind of just dissipate out into the rural community. And having that draws a very strong definition I think Peter and I, as we move forward with this project, I know I'm going to try to continue to bring this up. But it seems like a lot of your greenbelt space is actually outside of your control, although it's in the town and you say there's cooperation, but at some point, will you want to kind of grab some of that control and consolidate it for yourself? I know you, at this point, is the greenbelt's not under threat and the town is cooperative. But it's just, there is always kind of that looming threat that in the future at some point. So.
Yeah, again, something just to keep in mind as we move forward.
Yeah.
All right. A business development plan. And you can see there, this is a little less support for that. And I'm just curious about what people think about that. This is the idea of providing support for local businesses and encouraging local businesses and putting together a systematic approach to do that. That was one of the recommendations in the 2004 plan. And again, doesn't have quite the same support, still general support, but not quite the same as the other items we've just been looking at. Any thoughts, reactions?
I think it came from the desire to make sure that we have a vibrant, active community, business community downtown. Because people still, as Mayor Newhart said, they look to the village of Warwick. This is a vibrant neighborhood, and people come here to go shopping, etc. It's extremely, it provides good jobs. So those things have been, we wanted to maintain them in the 2004 plan.
Yeah. Thanks, Bill. What are people's sense of that in terms of the vitality of the village in the aftermath of the pandemic? And I have to confess, I haven't been to the village since March of last year. So how do things look, from your perspectives on these different boards and as residents and citizens? Don't make me call on somebody. I know how to do that. I used to teach. I mean, are things basically
open spaces that have been in the business district have filled up as soon as they became open? The one that really hasn't done anything yet is the Chase Bank, but all of the storefronts, if somebody went out, and I don't think many went out because of the pandemic, they go out for lots of reasons, but those spaces filled back up quickly. Did the retail market struggle during the pandemic? Yes, but everybody did. If you haven't been here in a year, a lot of us haven't been out of that places in a year, or even out of our homes for 6, 7, 8 months, when it was at its worst. So it's not unusual that people aren't coming, but now you see it and people are coming back, and they've been here. There's this strength coming back. There's more people downtown, definitely this week with the weather changes than past few weeks. I think all in all, everything considered about the pandemic, I think the village of Warwick has done pretty well.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, let me, on this topic, ask folks, in the context of the 2004 plan, there was a transition that was taking place. The library was moving, Country Chevy was moving out of the village, and there was, and the whole issue at the time of the Grand Union and what was going to happen with that. It seems that transition has happened, and things have adjusted, and the village is going on strong and vibrant. Is that a fair assessment of the situation?
What we have under this question of a physical expansion of the central business district, it's very hard. Parking is without a doubt a major issue. But a expansion in places like Elm Street or something,
So that's one of the options, is to think about it, given the vitality, maybe the central business district could make some even marginal expansion to bring more activity downtown.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in. I would agree. I've actually seen, I think, because of COVID, a lot of the potential business development projects are becoming residential, or at least the opportunity for them to become residential. Because there's a bigger market, honestly, in the movement of people, not necessarily business. So, the planning board, unfortunately, a lot of the projects throughout the past year have been somewhat delayed because of the pandemic. But, I feel that there's going to be a lot more of a residential push than even a business.
Oh, good point, Jesse. That's the nature of COVID. It's especially in the shadow of the New York metro area, the possibilities of remote work suddenly make the idea of relocating to a small village with a vibrant downtown really attractive to folks. Any concerns about that? Again, from your perspectives on your boards, as you see the things swinging and maybe the development potential for residential maybe outstripping commercial, maybe not, we'll have to see. But any thoughts about potential problems with that or opportunities that we need to think about moving forward?
Peter, I just want to chime in and say, as far as the business development and growth, it has been pretty consistent. Main Street was at one point the main place, but now Railroad Avenue has become another center of life. And now Country Chevy has been adaptively reused to be multiple stores and Bear Tavern. So suddenly Main Street has really extended. Even with the library leaving, it's now the Historical Society, which is a place to go as well. So in that respect, I think it's very exciting, and that's part of the vibrancy and resiliency, I believe. And you see small businesses opening on the secondary streets, almost like an incubator. And when they can, they move to Main Street if there's an opening. So that's all, I think, very good. I think the rub is the village grows as far as business development from the inside out. So it really touches upon residential spaces, residential neighborhoods. And we all know that becomes the rub. That becomes the difficult point, and where neighbors are, threatened. And so that is definitely one of the issues I think that we are contending with now, but we will continue to contend with in the future.
So how to manage that transition from commercial areas to residential areas, keeping the commercial areas vital, but the residential areas intact and high quality.
So I have one question about the pandemic and business resiliency and this topic, how the village can support business development. In a lot of communities, businesses were supported by the local municipality by allowing the business activity to spill into the public realm for outdoor dining, for curbside pickup, for retail that happened on the sidewalk. I'd like to hear your opinion of what you think of that moving forward. Do you think that's something that's going to continue in your community even after the pandemic? Or do you think there'll be a balance? Do you think it'll go back to what it was like in 2019? And what is the support from the village for providing outdoor open space for commercial activity?
Bill, I just want to chime in too, in that I don't know if you're aware, but last fall we received permission from the DOT and the State Liquor Authority to close Main Street. Yeah. And then we also closed Railroad Avenue and Spring Street, so that basically the center core of our business district was closed for outdoor dining. And that happened 4 days a week. It changed. It kind of modified as we went along, but we are continuing with that starting in another week and a half, April 16th. So that I think is, but what I want to also point out is I was by a restaurant today and they were building this beautiful outdoor trellis on a patio to really emphasize their outdoor space. And so all of these restaurants have really kind of recognized that new life in this outdoor realm. And I think that's very exciting. And I think we're going to see more private investment as well.
Right. So do you think as over the next 15, 20 years, as the village moves forward, recognizing the importance of that public space for business activity by creating flexible space as opposed to space that's dedicated to one activity or another is important?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, a great example is the South Street parking lot, which, we have festivals on that space, but we also have the farmers market on that space. It takes a life of its own, or Railroad Avenue, which when we close each end for a concert or for an activity, it becomes a much grander, much larger, pedestrian realm. And I always call it our piazza, but it really acts in a very unique way. And I think businesses prosper because of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason I'm getting at this question specifically is because, in 2014, when the comp plan was written, none of this was really part of the conversation. And now I think people have come to realize that the greatest amount of public space that communities own is the street. And they can use that street to improve business opportunity if they use it in the right way. So I think moving forward, I think that's one of the things that will continue to be pursued. Anyway, Peter, back to you.
But one of the things that allows the property owners, the owners of the buildings, to maintain a good income field is the possibility of having mixed use. The village now does allow apartments on the second floor, for example, which says that the property owner can have additional income, but also it allows people that be living there full time. Contributes more to the vibrancy of the village.
Right, very much so, because that brings people downtown 24 hours a day. Right.
That's correct. You just have no place to park a car.
No.
Just final question on the topic. Are those apartments above the stores in demand?
I do not know that. Are they?
Okay.
I would say rentals overall in the village are in high demand.
Yeah, probably.
As soon as one, and look, I've got several rentals in the village. As soon as I'm looking for a tenant, I've got half a dozen applicants the first day.
Okay.
Every time.
That's good.
Good to know that.
Couple other topics. The historic overlay zone was recommended in the 2004 plan, still seen as a high priority or somewhat important for the village. Folks' responses to that? How good a job are we doing with historic preservation, historic interpretation in the village?
Well, we've been working at that. We've been working at that can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. We've been working at that for a number of years, and we're very conscious of the history of the community and it's the ability of the history of the community and the look of the community to pull people into the community. And I myself, for one, believe in imagery, and we have imagery in this community, in Warwick. And the thing that the Architectural Review Board has tried so hard is to make it into a continuous look. And that, of course, is always the hardest part because you're working with individuals and each one knows everything. And so when you come along with everybody that knows everything and you try to knock some sense into their head, it becomes very difficult. However, through all the years, we've been pretty successful with it because over and over again, for example, Apple Fest, there are so many times that we'll hear someone say, I came only for Apple Fest, I fell in love with the village, and I bought a house here. And it's imagery, it's the actual substance of the houses and the park and the oldness and the newness that reminds everyone of our past. And everybody wants a little bit of the past, certainly more today than ever before. So I feel that the historic image for Warwick is very important.
And what other people, what do you think about that? Is that pretty much a settled consensus position that the historic preservation is an important function? Or is it still something where there's a creative tension between what's required to achieve that and, let's say, the cost of building or things like that?
I'll say that I would agree with everything you said. I think it's highly important. I think this also this closely relates to the other question you had about design standards, right? Because we can't, there are some structures that will need to be updated, right, to be safe and to protect people's investments. So if done in a style that's consistent with the history of the village, I think that just adds to the overall charm.
Okay.
And I think it's that charm that people desire, when they come to, when they visit Warwick and they want to come back. It's that image that they see, and the historic district helps to preserve that. My only concern is that we need stronger regulations to help enforce that image. And it's too easily, it gets away from us too easily because of lack of enforcement, and whether it's through the design guidelines or the regulations for the building department or whoever to enforce those, we can lose it quickly. It's just like the open space around us. That open space is only preserved up until the next land acquisition by someone who wants to develop it. So, you take a look at, let's just take, where Yesterday's wants to develop and build. There's always going to be an edge of our commercial zone to our residential zones. And do we, now that was approved to be, developed. But are there other ways of preserving spaces like that? Who knows? But we have to do it through these regulations and protection.
And so it's worth kind of revisiting the state of those regulations.
I think so.
Very definitely. So yes, Chris and I have been on this for a number of years, and we have to revitalize that whole concept of what is the historic district and what we can do to maintain that district. Because if it sits as it is today, it's like a mouthful of rotten teeth. There's one house that's being restored or protected, let's say protected, and the house right next to it equal or maybe better that has no protection. And then the third house is protected, and it goes on and on like that. And so we of the Architectural Review Board we're frustrated because we can't do what we want to do with the whole of the street. It's out of our hands. Also, it's out of our hands after the papers have gone from us to the next level, because we don't know ever that it's going to be changed, as it has done so many times. We'll okay something and then they're changed. And we don't have teeth to protect whatever we have said in reference to the restoration or the redevelopment of that piece of property.
what you're suggesting is that the ARB recommendations should have much more strength.
We need more teeth.
In the village code. They probably do need more teeth strength.
Yeah.
I would agree.
I'll give you a good example. Years ago, when the hospital wanted to put the new addition, which is on the corner of Maple Avenue, and they came to us with all of these absolutely beautiful drawings. They had the elevations, the drawings, and everyone was dazzled with what they were going to do. And we passed that with what they were going to do. What was achieved was absolutely 100% not what was shown to us. And there was nothing we could do about it.
I would ask, what are your thoughts? And I'm sorry, sir, your name just escaped me. I assume it's not Jane.
I'm Michael.
Yes, sir, Michael. Excellent points. I mean, what are your thoughts about, and you too as well, Chris, about the boundaries of the historic district?
Well, that's another point.
And the reason I'm asking is because
I'm hot on this, so I'll jump it the minute.
Yeah, no, the property that I have was built in 1908, but the historic district stops at the house next door.
Yeah, I think we need a redefining of the historical district.
Absolutely.
And a historical district doesn't necessarily need just to encompass just historical buildings. It needs to possibly go beyond that because there's more history than just structures.
Absolutely, Chris. Absolutely.
I just want to chime in a little bit, and that I know that Michael, you have heard in the past we were looking at the Certified Local Government Program through New York State Historic Preservation. And we are opening that file back up, and we've had some very good discussions with Albany, with that department. But the Certified Local Government Program is the type of thing that would give our ARB and our AHRB the teeth, I think, that you are talking about. But also, one of the most important things is the creation of a local historic district, not a state and federal district, but a local district that is achieved on a local level that would protect these types of properties.
Well, we have a very strong local historic society, as you know, Michael, very strong. We're probably one of the strongest in the state of New York. We're one of the biggest, certainly, if not the strongest. But yes, indeed, we need that, and we could do that very easily. But we need the backing of the village itself for this too. As Tom just said before, and it happened to me, the Lewis estate and the house that I owned on Maple Avenue, they were the end of the historic district, and there was at least 2 miles beyond that was still full of antique or houses that should have been recognized. And that's going towards Florida. And the other way, the historic district ends at the cemetery gates. So you see, it should go beyond in all directions, east, west, north, and south. And it should be a solid band so that we can protect in many ways, in many guises, what we have to do for what we have, because it disappears so fast. On High Street, we lost an antique house, a small house that at one time had been used in the beginning of the 19th century as a small farm, and then it was an ironmonger's property, and it just disappeared overnight. And so these things happen within minutes, and we have seen it happen, and we cannot allow it. Right on High Street, there were 2 antique houses that disappeared now within the last 15 years, and there's no reason for that.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm taking away from this is, however it's addressed, that history matters for the village, and the question becomes, how do we preserve it and use it to strengthen the village? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, good. Parks and Recreation Plan. We're coming towards the end of this, and we're going to have a more free-form discussion. But this was seen by about a little over 60% of the respondents as high priority, somewhat important by another 20%, and already addressed by a couple other respondents. So what do folks think about the idea of a parks and recreation plan for the village? Because I guess right now there are plans for particular parks, but does there need to be a system-wide plan? Or not?
I guess I kind of look at parks as, we're not in our own little bubble relative to this, because there are a lot of things that we can't do everything for everybody as a village.
Yep.
So we have to, work with the other villages in the town to, provide a full spectrum of parks and recreational activities. But certainly we need to be able to show what we're willing to take on and what fits within the system that we have, so that then others can use that to develop their own plans that would then allow a more comprehensive system that serves the entire population of not only the 3 villages, but the town.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of another topic that really lends itself to coordination and cooperation between the governments.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And what about connections between existing parks and open spaces, multi-use trails, paths, that sort of thing, between possibly even schools or areas of residence and existing parks?
I know a few years ago, we had a nice dream of connecting Memorial Park some way to Main Street, and then from Main Street out to the high school. It was a nice dream. I'd still love to be able to do it, but we ran into lots of problems because some of that property is owned by the railroad. The railroad doesn't want to deal with it. And other properties going out to the high school, for example, would have to go past a place like George, the chemical company. So a fantastic opportunity. We could have also another area that is ripe for something is the Warwick Creek going through the village. It's sort of it still looks like an afterthought to me. When you go travel around Europe, many times there's a creek running through a village is a center of the village. Now it's sort of sometimes, unfortunately, a dump.
Right.
It could be an asset. Could be much more of an asset than it is.
Other folks' thoughts about the Warwick? Is it an underutilized resource, or is it pretty much?
I absolutely agree. It's underutilized. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bill's got a very good point. And perhaps we should reimagine that should be considered part of a park, right?
Right. Well, it's looking back through the old planning documents as early as 1998 or 1999. That was part of the discussion. So it's not a new idea.
No, it's not a new idea.
Michael, you may remember that we had someone who came in and did a study of the creek.
Yeah, it was a very comprehensive study, and it's there for the picking. It really has a kind of a vision for the stream corridor, as we call it, and I think it is definitely underused, and it just. In many cases, as far as the village goes, the priority became a wastewater treatment plant.
Sure.
So.
Well, Michael, didn't you and a group of people about 4 years ago try to portage down the Wawayanda?
Oh yes, and now I'll tell you something. From Wickham Lake, when I did that foraging, it took 7 hours to get into the village. And now you can do it in a swift hour if the water is running, because there's been a group called the Way We Onders that have been clearing the stream over the past 2 years, and it is extraordinary trip. And I, anybody who has a kayak, it's great. You really see the world in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And people get out. I mean, there's been talk about a kayak dock, or a place in the village for kayaks to end up, and that has been either Memorial Park or further down, closer to the center of the village.
Great.
Yeah, so
I'd just like to say that I'm a little concerned, because if Weweyanda was, on the table with the comprehensive plan back in '94, you said, I think, and I know I served on a sidewalk committee when my daughter was an infant. She's now a freshman in college, and I feel like there's been some improvements, and it's great, but I think what would be helpful would be to be able to track the progress. It's nice to present it and say this is a priority, but how can we track it? Even if there is no progress, just tracking that stuff is under consideration, that meetings are happening, that plans are being made, that grants are being applied for, perhaps through an implementation matrix that's available to the public. Because I think it would be kind of a waste to have the same conversation again in 18 years.
Yep.
Yeah, much fun as it is. Yeah, it isn't necessarily a good time.
Well, Carrie,
Go ahead.
you might find it interesting, I did, to go back to the planning documents that were produced in the late 90s and early 2000s, and almost everything that's being talked about today was talked about then. And I agree. It, part of what I want to find out from the group over the next month or so is how much of what was talked about, what is the progress? And I think, Peter and I will be getting at that with this group. How much of it has been done, how much of it remains to be done, and then how can the comprehensive plan address the remainder that has not yet been done?
And going back to Carrie's point, what would an implementation plan look like for some of those initiatives? So we can say this should happen by the second year, this should happen by the third year, and so on, to give an opportunity to track progress. A couple other things. The annexation policy was an important concern in 2000. This is a little change of topic here. This is almost looking at kind of fiscal concerns as well as land use concerns, and how to support the growth in population and the fiscal support for services. Thoughts about annexation and the role it has played and should play.
Let me interpret this data. These two boards, the village board and the planning board, indicated by some people that it's already addressed. And I think that may give you a incorrect opinion. Yes, it has been addressed. There is a very good policy between the village and the town that would control annexation. So maybe the people who answer that is it has been addressed. I think I may have answered that because I think it has been addressed. The policy is enforced. So I may be one of those yellow people.
Okay.
It's a very important issue, though.
Yeah, there are challenges and opportunities associated with it. And I know that the village has done some work on annexation. I've actually been involved in.
I think there's a difference between a policy, which yes, has been captured, and a plan once the town and the village come to an agreement on the next property to be annexed, right? So I think there's a slight distinction here. Policy, I think we have. I think though the plan, once that happens, assuming it does again, how are we gonna handle that as a village?
Tom, on the annexation policy or agreement between the village and the town, it's very detailed. What will happen to the property? The property, one of the issues that we addressed is the fact that properties which are annexed into the village got an immediate annexation bonus because they could have larger 2-acre lots. Now they can have half-acre lots or something, and so they have many more units
Right.
on the same amount of property. The annexation property as exists says that any property that comes into the village now has the same zoning that exists in the town where it came from. Unless they go through a plan where they go through a traditional neighborhood design, they preserve 40% of the area as open space. And they also have a opportunity, not an opportunity, requirement for increase in the number of affordable units in the property. So it's more of a policy and a plan. It's a little more than just a policy.
Yeah, no, agreed. I think it would impact the build out analysis, which I think the last report was 2001, right? Just basically how can the village handle the additional residents, right? As far as infrastructure, water, sewage, et cetera. But yeah, agree. The policy I think is there. So I think what you're saying, Bill, is that, yeah, maybe this is already addressed in that policy that had been formulated since the last plan in 2004, right? So maybe we're good there. I think that maybe though it would more influence that build out analysis, which kind of a side question, are we revising that build out analysis, which I believe is separate from the comprehensive plan?
You're correct that it's separate from the comprehensive plan. It's not in our scope. And it was done, something that was done under special funding last time. It might have been the Hudson River Valley Greenway that supported it, I believe.
And just a side note, Hudson River Valley Greenway has their grant cycle open right now.
Any annexation, of course, must be contingent upon the village's infrastructure to support it. Is there sufficient water and sewers, the major thing?
There you go.
That would have to be.
So I think what I'm getting from this discussion is, there's been work done on that. It's probably worth reviewing it to see, what's the status of it? Have conditions changed in the last 17 years that, we need? Are there any tweaks that we need to recommend to that in the comprehensive plan?
Mm-hmm.
Partnership with the town, I think this is something we've sort of been discussing throughout, and clearly, compared to a lot of places, this, from my observation, there's a strong partnership between the town and the villages and the village of Warwick in particular. Any disagreements with that? I see a pretty good working relationship, all in all. Everything could use improvements, but generally, this looks like communities, governments that play well together.
I would think that the village and the town of Warwick have a better working relationships than most villages and towns that I know about around here. We get along pretty well, unless the mayor has another thought.
Yeah.
The town supervisor recognizes that if he has 3 strong villages, he has a stronger town.
Mm-hmm.
Good. And, as we're looking at this, some of the other issues that we'd like to think about is, the most important issue for which the updated plan can provide guidance for your board and committee, and these are examples. And some of these we've already touched on. If as you as individuals and members of these policy boards, you're thinking, you're dealing with the state of both the policies in the village on at least a monthly basis. As you come into this session, you're thinking, God, if we could do a comprehensive plan, I really hope it would address blank. What's your perception?
I have a strong feelings about the environmental issues. I've been thinking a lot about this meeting, and I attended a webinar, a comprehensive planning webinar back in May, and had some ideas, and I've been writing them down. So I'm more the type I can speak if I've written it down. So I'm going to tell you what I wrote.
Sure.
I think that Warwick can pledge, if it hasn't already, to be a climate smart community. New York State allows for municipalities to create comprehensive plans and laws that feature and enforce biodiversity. That we should be using biodiversity in land use planning, and by integrating biodiversity information and conservation principles into land use planning, decision makers can help reduce the negative impacts of development on biodiversity, such as forest fragmentation, stream flow modification, and invasive species introduction. And we could go beyond New York State minimums, which are the current measure. And I felt this on the planning board. There was a project, and there was, of course, they presented why, the environmental codes that they were going to meet, and kind of presented it as like an environmental project in a way. And I asked somebody about, could we ask their HOA to do organic lawn practices? Because there were going to be a lot of lawns. And I was poo-pooed, because it's like, oh no, they only have to meet New York State minimums. To ask for something that is above that is, not going to happen. It could happen though, if it's in the comprehensive plan, and we're willing to support it with stronger languages, I'm very happy to share this with Tom or someone, and I can give you my notes on this, because I don't want to bore everybody reading all the wonderful things I've discovered on the journey. But I found one article particularly interesting about incorporating biodiversity into municipal land use planning. That was published by some authors from Cornell, and I really like that article. So I feel that for me, and from the standpoint of planning, I think environmental issues is very important. Having somebody who could perhaps create a blueprint for us, the expectations, and being proactive instead of waiting for something to happen and then realize we don't have the language, the teeth, the laws to fortify it. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to stop the screen share, because I want to see your lovely faces. We've done enough of the PowerPoint, but other thoughts, because one of the things that was missing in the 2004 plan, because it wasn't discussed at all, was the whole question of environmental sustainability and resilience. And Carrie just, I think, made the case that we need to be thinking about that. Any other thoughts about that? Is that something that needs to be addressed here, or is it pretty much under control in terms of what the
I'll give you a few ideas of how that can be addressed. So in the village's street tree management plan, you can specify, for instance, that you only want native plants, or the village itself in its landscape management plan can use more environmentally sensitive techniques, things that Carrie was talking about. So those are just two ways to start to influence those issues. And there's many more.
Yeah, and for example, yes, Matthew, I think you were going to.
And I think that, that becomes part of the brand too. I mean, we're surrounded by farmland. We have this really amazing farmers market that brings all these people in from all over. It seems like environmental ideas should be part of the brand that we're talking about, the brand of the village, because of our location and because of the fact that, we're surrounded by this, immense amount of farmland and, open space. So, I think that becomes part of our brand. And, in design, we always talk about the, branding is a part of an experience, and when I teach my students about this, I'm always like, think about when you walk into, this is kind of what Carrie was talking about too. Like, think about when you walk into a Starbucks, like there's something, you smell something, you see something, you feel something, like there's a whole experience of that. And you keep coming back because you want that experience. So if environmental sustainability is part of that experience, I think it just adds to the brand.
Yeah.
I do have a question on this, right? So capturing the importance of environmental sustainability in a plan, I think is easy, right? Because one, if you think about the purpose of the plan is to provide that foundation and rationale for all future land use decisions. So capturing that as important, I think that makes sense, right? But the plan also does provide recommendations. So I'm curious. I mean, what does that look like? Or is it really just capturing the fact that it is important so that in the future, in whatever scenario, we can point back to the comprehensive plan to say, well, one of the reasons, right, for the basis of this decision is because it was deemed as that important to be part of the strategy of the village.
Tom, just to give you a couple of examples, what Carrie talked about in terms of pledging to be a climate smart community, if that's in the comprehensive plan, that puts the village on a path in terms of the kinds of regulations it adopts, just like doing the historic preservation stuff. Another example would even be things like, not to get too deep into the weeds, no pun intended, but like riparian buffers. How do you preserve stream corridors by keeping the native vegetation undisturbed? Which, that's one of the things. Also, part of sustainability has to do with disruptions that might be caused by things like climate change. I did a village economic development plan for Coventry, Vermont, and while I was doing it, the downtown flooded twice. There's a plan, and it's an ongoing issue for them. Is there anything like that in the village that the plan needs to be aware of in terms of potential for flooding or other kinds of environmental disruption?
Mm-hmm. We've had a couple floods.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think also because what the articles also talked about was creating a coordinated effort. So if there was a way, and it doesn't have to be expensive or a big ticket item, Emma. It can be simply, that people in the community map their own terrain or discuss like what species exist in their pond behind their house, or things like that. Once that's mapped, then you can make regulations, or even simply, a new homeowner, they move up, they're like, oh, I'm going to cut that hedge, but if they had the information provided by the village, like the hedge behind your house is a home to this, these are things that you can do to help preserve those birds or these, whatever, bugs or whatever. So I think without a huge expense, it can be part of something that everybody can participate in a positive way. And like Matthew was saying about it being part of, well, I'm choosing to live in Warwick because of this. I want to do business in Warwick because of this. I think it's value added. I don't think it's like, perhaps it's perceived as expensive. It doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so some communities mandate things such as, if you're going to cut down a tree that's over 6 inches in diameter, you need to have approval from the town forester or the village forester, or 12 inches in diameter on private property. It's pretty controversial, but it can be done. Other communities have regulations that you cannot remove a tree that's in front of your house that's on municipal property without approval from the authority, which in many cases is like the village arborist. Basically, if it's not a diseased tree that's threatening anybody, it should stay in place. So there are regulations like that can be written into zoning law. The comprehensive plan is not law. So that should be, you should remember that whatever is discussed here is not zoning law, it's recommendation.
So, Bill, we do have some of those regulations in the village code already, like the removal of trees if it's greater than 4 inches of diameter. So point well taken. I think we have some of that stuff, at least from my research.
We do have a shade tree commission in the village of Warwick.
Right.
Had very active. I don't know how active it is recently, but we lost one of the major persons on the shade tree commission, Roger Metzger. I don't know.
A big problem that you have with a lot of these suggestions is enforcement. How do you enforce it?
Right.
It's all great to write all this stuff down and have guidelines and so forth, but how do you enforce it? You're talking about trees. Okay, well, by the time, someone says, oh my gosh, someone just cut that tree down. Well, guess what? It got cut down.
It's already down.
It's gone. It's done. So how do you enforce that? And how do you get that information out to the public to say, hey, listen, before you pull out the saw, what do I have to do something? Do I have to ask somebody? Do I need a permit? And most people, I would say the majority of the people in the village of Warwick probably have no clue what their laws are and codes are.
Right.
And so a lot of things happen. And just from the historical district or the ARB, that whole thing about having teeth, we see it all the time. We'll be driving through the village and like, oh my gosh, someone's, renovating the front of that house or tearing something down. And, and it's after the fact because a lot of people think that it's, it's easier to just do and ask for forgiveness.
Right.
But then it's gone. It's, so enforcement is a huge thing. And, especially for us in the ARB, we see so much that happens that there's no enforcement.
Okay. Yeah.
People just do.
That's not unique to Warwick.
That's right. Yeah. It's every town and village has the same issues.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, what citizen is going to go through the village code and or the zoning ordinances? They don't know much of the laws that govern them, or that maybe protect them in some ways. So I think one of the things that the village government can do, and I always felt very strongly about this, was create kind of the best practices and guidelines to kind of put this stuff into language or into a way that it's very accessible. Whether it's about the historic district and what that board does, what the planning board does, and what you have to do to be prepared. I mean, that interface with your community, I think, is probably the most critical and important thing for any document, and I think it would enlighten a lot of people. So if we could put that as a goal, boy, that would be remarkable, because I think the more that people know, it empowers them.
Yeah, and where you don't have to look and mine for the information, where the accessibility of the information is much easier.
And that's a good example of a kind of recommendation in the plan that could be useful in getting grant support for the effort.
Right.
If the plan recognizes that as an important priority for the community, then funding sources where you might be able to get additional money to actually put the thing together.
Right.
And I know I mentioned not big ticket, but I mean, we also don't, not everybody in the village is so familiar with building rules either, but we have a building inspector for that. Like having a biodiversity professional, maybe not full-time or whatever, but somebody to help set up the tracking and mapping of environmental strengths and vulnerabilities, and being instrumental as to maybe recognizing stuff as it's happening, or being that person who can disseminate the information in a way that's comprehensible, might be a worthy investment as well.
Well, it could be also, listen, we have a planning board, we have a zoning board, we have an architectural review board, so maybe you create some volunteer boards that concentrate on these particular areas of the comprehensive plan to help, enforce and implement and so forth.
Yeah. So because I promised everybody we'd be out in an hour and a half, which gives us about 3 minutes. However, I'm not going to be a real stickler for time, but what I'd love to hear from each of you is, what do you want this plan to do for Warwick? What's the single most important thing that this comprehensive plan needs to say or recommend or describe?
I think one of the most important things
Michael, go ahead.
is to do it. We've been talking about this since 18, 19, 20 years. And, it's more talk and more talk and more talk. Somebody has to do it.
So an implementation focus on the plan, from the plan. Okay, that's good. Others?
Let me chime in here, Peter. On your list of things, the last slide you had, one of the issues there that struck me is affordability of the Village of Warwick. The things we are talking about, the things we talked about in the 2004 plan, actually made the village a more desirable place to be. But being more desirable, it became more expensive. So I think we really have to wrap our head around how do we make affordable, or the terminology, workforce housing. How do we do that? I think we're driving those people out of the village.
Yeah, and you described the dynamic exactly right. The more you build amenity in the village, the more desirable it is, the higher the housing prices are going to be.
Right.
No
answer for that. One of the easy answers is smaller lots. Smaller lots, you typically have less expensive houses, but that's an easy answer. There must be much better answers than that.
You don't want small, cheap houses. You want to increase the value. You don't want small, cheap. We want better people in the community. We want better housing in the community. We want it up, not level or mediocre.
And I think that describes the tension of this whole effort pretty well, Michael. Other thoughts now, because affordability is something, the idea of having an implementable plan. Must be something that each way of you guys at these meetings, when you are going through these project reviews, I wish we could talk about.
So for me, I think walkability is a big one, right? But that also comes from my experience. I have 3 kids and live in a neighborhood with a lot of kids. I think in terms of and I know Bill, you had mentioned that we've been trying to do this for a long time, and it costs money to put additional sidewalks. And Mayor Newhart, we've talked about this in the past, but I think taking another look and having some specific recommendations in the plan about areas, such as connecting the new firehouse and South Street Extension, and areas heading out towards, I know it goes towards the town, but towards the middle school and high school, areas that really that you do see a lot of foot traffic, but there's also cars just whizzing by. And I think it's a safety issue. So that's one of the things that's top of mind for me.
I'm curious, what is the village's policy on sidewalk maintenance and construction? Is it actually sidewalk and curb? Are they both on the, are they both the responsibility of the property owner or not?
They are, Bill. They are owned and responsibility of the property owner.
Okay.
That's if they're there. If we're trying to do something new in a development, certainly it becomes the responsibility of the developer to accommodate the wishes of the planning board when they go through the process of getting an approval. But ultimately, then it becomes the maintenance responsibility of the homeowner, at least the sidewalks. I'm not sure about the curbing generally. If there are some problems with the curbing, Village DPW will handle that.
So is there a policy for homes, single family homes that don't have a sidewalk? If there's a desire by the village to have a sidewalk, to have one put in?
I think the attitude
Is there a
is that it's
mechanism?
incumbent upon the village to do that, as opposed to force the property owner to do that. And as Tom expressed, we've got some gaps throughout the village where, you know, we've got a development that was developed with sidewalks, and yet it doesn't connect all the way into the village. So, you know, we've got, you know, it's the price tag is well out of reach without a lot of funding availability and the support of grants.
And to answer your question, there's nothing in the code, and I've scoured this from what I can see, that requires you, if there's not in front of your house, that should be that you have to. I think as Barry said, it's the responsibility of the village.
And for uniformity too, I think that it really should probably fall into the hands of the village, you know, because you have accessibility issues too, and continuity and consistency of these sidewalks. You know, you know, walkability of the village, you're absolutely right. You know, living in the village, we walk all the time. But, you know, you'll walk in front of 20 homes and the sidewalk is different in front of every home. And you know, and also, you know, at intersections and curb cuts, crosswalks, you know, the village becomes a very, especially Friday, Saturdays, even Sundays are very, very busy location. And, you know, so the speed of cars and traffic, the safety at crossings, the sidewalks for people to get around. And, but I think the sidewalks become, I don't know, the only way to control it is for the village to have to take the lead on that. Because if you put it in the homeowner's hands, everybody will do their own thing and may not be meeting certain guidelines and requirements.
And I feel like that's part of the entrance into the village as well. Like, I feel like, you know, coming from ShopRite area, there's a set of sidewalks and you feel like you come into the village when you come in from that way. You know, I live on Maple Ave, almost to the edge of the village, and it's kind of a gray area. Like, you're not really sure where the village ends or begins. And, you know, there's not that like discernible entrance to the village. It almost feels like you don't get to the village until you're almost to the hospital, you know, because then that's where sidewalks start and there's curbs and it becomes more village-like. So I don't know. It's just, I think all directions need that, you know, a little more entrance to the.
In some ways, we deal with the development trends over periods of time with sidewalks. For example, Pond Hill, there's not a sidewalk to be had. And there are other developments from that period of time where it was like anti-sidewalk, or I don't know why, but South Street Extension is a good example. So those houses like from the 50s and 60s seem to have, you know, no sidewalk conditions. And so it becomes harder to retrofit, as Barry was pointing out, but I don't think it's impossible.
I don't even know if it's necessarily all that important that all the ancillary streets have sidewalks per se. You know, we all grew up, a lot of us, no sidewalks, and just we walked on the street. But I think your main corridors coming in, Maple, Oakland, South Street, Galloway, you know, those main corridors should have, I think they should have sidewalks. You know, once you start to get away from that, maybe not, you know. Some of the older portions of the village do have sidewalks. Okay, so keep them going. But I think having some continuity on the main thoroughfares that come through the village, those are important.
Even in older section of the village, which I live in, I cannot walk from my house to Larry's on a sidewalk. It's a dangerous walk. It should be sidewalks, but it does cost money to do. I know that.
Yeah.
So in this little discussion, we talked about the importance of implementation, affordability, walkability, any other topics that, you know, any of you see is really critical for the success of this update of the plan.
I have one additional comment, maybe it's because I'm kind of new to I've only been on the Architects Review Board for a couple of years. I feel like a little bit, maybe the different boards are a little bit in silos. Is there a way that we could conceive like kind of cross-pollinating those so that, you know, each group kind of has someone, a liaison that can kind of communicate between each other? I don't know if that would help. And the reason it came to my mind is I used to live in Savannah for a few years. You know, you want to talk about a city with an experience like that's, you know, the quintessential experience of a city. And I was just kind of looking through some of their historic stuff, and they have obviously having a historic review board, but it seems like they work pretty closely with the planning board. And you know, it even said in their laws, if the architecture review board, historic review board doesn't approve it, you don't get a permit. So it seems very, you know, has more teeth, as we were, you know, saying. But I think maybe that comes from there being some integration between the two groups, you know? So I don't know, that's just kind of something I've noticed, that, you know, being new to the groups, that being new to a board, that maybe that could help.
I think it would be helpful if, you know, having, you know, we have a village board made up of trustees and the mayor. And, you know, would it be crazy to consider having liaisons, you know, of the trustees to communicate with some of these different boards?
Yeah, well, just, you know, what's the right?
Yep. There you go, Barry. You win.
I'm in.
I'm in.
So sorry if I haven't been doing a
Barry's
good job.
Barry's it.
How many nights a week are you gonna be out, Barry?
Well,
you know, Bill, I mean, I would come to planning board meetings occasionally, but you know, it's been a while since we've been out and about. So
yeah, and you know, I think because it is difficult that you're all volunteering, and you know, there's only so many night meetings that a body can stand. But you know, we maybe do need to think about, are there mechanisms, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a liaison or joint meetings, but are there mechanisms to bring these policy bodies together on a regular basis so the right hand knows what the left hand is doing? Because you've set up a complex task for yourself to manage this little jewel of a village, and that's a complicated thing to do. And it might be worth thinking about, are there other ways to enhance that process without exhausting all of you, to make it easier and more effective? So, you know, I see that then as a takeaway for something for me to think about as we go forward from here.
One other thing I'd like to suggest is, I'm looking over this crowd we have here. A lot of gray hair, etc. A lot of experience, which is great, but I think we need to reach out to people, particularly the younger people in the village of Warwick. We need to get some younger people. They have a whole different perspective on the world than I do, for sure. And we should get somehow work to get them involved. Even anybody nobody under here 30, I bet you. You know, people under 30, young families.
Yep. No, I think that's important. You know, I was just looking at demographics. The median age of the village of Warwick in 2020 is projected to be like 47. So it's pushing 50. So we need, but I think we need to think about getting sort of the next generation involved and to do that systematically. And that's not unique to Warwick. You know, that's everywhere, but you know, we should be thinking about. Any other thoughts? Because I've already taken you over by probably 10 minutes. Yeah, I did.
Okay.
But the other thing is, you have, through the Zoom invite, you certainly have my email, and I think you also have Bill's. And as you go through and think about other things that should be part of the plan or issues that you're concerned about, you should feel free to reach out. And, you know, if not, then you could please go through Barry, who's the chair of the committee. But, you know, you could email either of us directly also.
Are we gonna have another meeting? This was fun.
Well, what's your appetite for it? I mean, it might be worth bringing it back together towards the end of the process.
Yeah, I think Peter, you know, we've got a pretty significant outreach effort planned. But once we have that data and we've ingested that, I think that would make another meeting with this crew almost that more impactful.
Yeah, because we're just talking about coordinating mechanisms, and there's probably no better coordinating mechanism than to put out, here are the draft concepts that we're thinking about for the comprehensive plan, and give you all a crack at it in your different capacities, as a way of keeping the conversation going. I think that's a terrific idea. All right, any other last words from anybody, for anybody, about anybody? This has really been very helpful. Bill and I both appreciate the time you've taken and the thought you've given to this, and we will, it serves you right. We'll be back to bother you again because of the valuable contributions you've made tonight. So thank you all, and stay safe.
Yeah.
And
Thank
take
you.
care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.